Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are entering. This is Sukjong Lee, the representative of Asia Democracy Research Network, and also Senior Fellow at East Asia Institute. The purpose of our webinar is to present the horizontal accountability of 5 countries. ADRN's research theme of 2003 to 2004 has been 2002 and 2023 has been horizontal accountability. So typically we'll hear the status and the challenges of horizontal accountability, focusing on checks and balance between executive power and the legislature and judicial system. And then also within the executive branch, there are many audit and checking institutions. So we'll focus on that. So with so I will ask you to present 10 minutes each, and after 15 minutes, we'll engage in kind of mutual discussion, so that can help for you to revise your final paper. So without further ado, I will invite Jung Kim, the Associate Professor of University of North Korean Studies, and he will present the Korean case.
Okay, thank you very much for having me in this webinar. I'll present the case study of South Korea in the context of horizontal accountability and the democratic implication here. So let me first share. So based on the first presentation that we had a month ago, I add some qualitative studies about why sometimes the horizontal accountability works, but in other times it doesn't in the context of South Korean democracy here. So let's start with the this is some repetition of last presentation here. So I introduced 2 different the idea of horizontal accountability. First one is the jury horizontal accountability. This is a kind of legal institutional prescription about horizontal accountability. And I try to measure the executive power, legislative power, and judicial power based on some comparative studies here. And this is the outcome. I introduced the 18 third wave democracies from East Asia and the Latin America and the Eastern European countries. And this is the outcome for the just pose the executive power with the legislative power, and the dotted line indicate the median score of executive and legislative power. As you can see, among the 18 third wave democracies, South Korea is more or less the medium level of executive power as well as the medium level of legislative power. So in that sense, it is located in so-called sweet spot in the constitutional design. And this is the just a pose between the executive power and judicial power. And as you can see, even the location of South Korea is the center of the Swiss part here. So in terms of constitutional design, at least comparatively speaking, the South Korea should work very effectively to make the check and balance mechanism smoothly, so that in terms of constitutional design, we expect that the so-called executive aggrandizement is relatively rare in the South Korean democracies. That's the expectation. But that's the story about on the parchment. So actually, the varieties of democracy project measure not the de jure horizontal accountability, but de facto horizontal accountability performance. So I collect the data for the VDEM's horizontal accountability index, and at the same time, I also include the liberal democracy index of VDEMs to measure the quality of democracy. And this is the outcome. So once again, to have some comparative reference, I also include 18 third wave democratizers here. As you can see, I just, from the 2000 until 2020, I tried to see some longitudinal change in terms of the horizontal accountability performance and its effect on the quality of democracy in South Korea. So if you can see the right side of the figure, then it means the quality of democracy as well as the horizontal accountability performance declined. But if you can see the location of the country in the right side of the 45-degree line, then there is improvement in terms of horizontal accountability performance as well as the quality of democracy. So as you can see, the left side, this is the comparison between 2000-2004 horizontal accountability index against 2005-2009 horizontal accountability index here. So South Korea is here. So this for the 5-year term, South Korea slightly declined in terms of its horizontal accountability performance, and right side similar kind of movement in the declining in quality of democracy. And the next 2005-2009 against 2010-2014, the comparison, South Korea even getting worse in terms of horizontal accountability as well as the quality of democracy. So this is so-called, we can say that during this period, South Korea experienced some sort of the democratic backsliding, so-called. And then here you can see this is the 2010-2014 against 2015-2019, the horizontal accountability and the quality of democracy. South Korea now bounced back. So this is a typical example of so-called democratic resilience in terms of the quality of democracy. And one of the causes for that democratic resilience can be captured by the improvement of the horizontal accountability performance here. So there might be some association between the performance of horizontal accountability and improved quality of democracy in South Korea in comparative perspective. So why this kind of, say, backsliding as well as resilience in terms of democracy has some association with the, say, horizontal accountability? That's the question to be answered. I introduced the idea of so-called democratic careening here. So South Korea is one of the democratic near misses that experience a deterioration in the democratic quality without fully sliding into authoritarianism and recovers its high quality democracy in a few years. This South Korea's democratic near miss can be explained by the dynamics of democratic careening for the last 2 decades. Democratic careening means either when a liberal president who prioritizes electoral mandate over constitutional constraints can overreach toward populist excess. That's one, say, possible direction of tyranny. The other direction is when a conservative president who prioritizes constitutional constraints over electoral mandate overreach toward oligarchical access. So there is some extreme swing from say the populist excess to oligarchical excess. So that's some typical dynamics of the South Korean democracy that have experienced in the last 20 years, backsliding as well as the resilience. And this is some kind of timeline of democratic training in South Korea. We have two attempts of presidential impeachment. One is 2004 and the other is 2016. The first one is failed because the Constitutional Court overturned the impeachment of President Roh Moo-hyun. But the second one, impeachment of the President Park Geun-hye, was upheld by the Constitutional Court. And basically why there is that kind of differences, because these two episodes has some different combination of the accountability mechanisms. The first one is involved triggered by President Roh's violation of constitutional provision mandating presidential impartiality, which instigated the political reaction of conservative opposition to impeach him in March in 2004. But impeachment of Roh was perceived as oligarchic access by the general public, who expressed their widespread discontent against conservative opposition through large-scale candlelight rallies and gave a clear mandate to Roh's governing party with a legislative majority status in the National Assembly election in April. And reflecting the popular verdict over the issue, the Constitutional Court overturned the impeachment and reinstituting him as president in May. The second episode, the several news media reported that President Park was at the center of unprecedented corruption scandal, which activated large-scale candlelight rallies that demanded the impeachment of her in October 2016. And liberal oppositions were cautious to initiate the impeachment motion because of the populist backlash that they had seen in the first episode of democratic hearing. However, they finally passed the motion with some dissident legislators from the Park's governing party, mainly due to the political pressure of a million participants of candlelight rallies who perceived Park corruption as oligarchic excess in December. So the candlelight rallies last to March 2017, when the Constitutional Court unanimously upheld the impeachment, ousting her from office. And this episode was completed by Moon's opposition party won the snap presidential election in May. So in conclusion, in South Korea, the both episode, what halted democratic training was accountability mechanism that started with diagonal accountability, pressure from civil society and media. So this is the central player in terms of accountability mechanism in South Korea. In the first episode, candlelight rallies nudged vertical accountability, the victory of Roh's governing party in the legislative election, and in turn, horizontal accountability, overturning the impeachment by the Constitutional Court. So second episode, media revelation and large-scale candlelight rallies jolted horizontal accountability, the impeachment of Park initiated by the National Assembly and upheld by the Constitutional Court, and in turn, vertical accountability, victory of the Moon's opposition party in the presidential election. So in sum, in South Korea, horizontal accountability is a kind of dependent variable, which is, say, affected by whether there is effective diagonal accountability movement or not. So that's why we can see in terms of accountability mechanism, why South Korea can experience backsliding as well as the resilience in terms of democratic quality. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure many have questions to Professor Kim's excellent presentation. Just hold it after we finish all the 5 cases. Second presenter is Professor Francis Magno, Senior Fellow from La Salle Institute of Governance. So he will speak about the case of Philippines.
Okay, good afternoon. My paper is called Horizontal Accountability at Risk in the Philippines. So what we did, I have Martin Joseph Vivo as a co-author. So in this presentation, in this paper, we look at the evolution of horizontal accountability in the Philippines that emerged from the People's Power Revolution in 1986. From 1972 to 1986, the Philippines experienced authoritarian rule where executive aggrandizement was heavily observed, with the executive performing legislative as well as judicial functions. So the 1987 Constitution that was established curtailed that overwhelming power of the executive and enabled stronger horizontal accountability mechanisms with the institution of a strong legislature and an independent judicial system. But then the system of accountability is at risk in consideration of the weak parliament or Congress in the Philippines, as well as the also weak judiciary. Although there are instances of the judiciary establishing its independence, but over the last few years, we've seen stronger a process of stronger exhibition of executive aggrandizement. So in this paper, we look at indices to as part of this assessment. We included the Constitute Formal Institutional Index that considered measures of executive power, legislative power, and judicial independence. We also considered Horizontal Accountability Index from the VDEM Varieties of Democracy project, where we look at how the executive respects the Constitution, the performance of the bicameral legislature, legislative practices in investigating executive administration or executive practices, how the legislature questions officials in practice, compliance of the executive with high court decisions, compliance with the judiciary, and this also connects to high court independence, lower court independence, and executive oversight. But we went beyond what is constitutional, because we assess how horizontal accountability is exercised in practice. The issue of horizontal accountability is not new in the country, but what intensified or exacerbated the process was the emergence or the rise of authoritarian populism. and executive aggrandizing governance, as well as insufficient efforts in democratization. We cited, for example, the weak political party system with the tendency of elected legislators to switch to the party of the executive, or if it's not jumping to the party of the president, it's the formation of a coalition among political parties that are supportive of the executive. In terms of the constitutional indices, as we mentioned, the 1987 Philippine Constitution allowed really for the rise of legislative authority and judicial independence. So there are, for example, 11 provisions that were previously exercised by the executive under authoritarian rule that were given to the legislature, and 4 out of 6 to the judiciary. But then if we analyze the data, it would indicate that since 1987, well, there was a rise in horizontal accountability. There are trends indicating a decline, as can be seen here in 2004, and a slight increase over several years, but then you see this decline over the past several years. So what we see in this paper is that declining horizontal accountability is a cause for concern with the rise of executive aggrandizement in the Philippines. What we are arguing here is the need to really strengthen accountability institutions and mechanisms, and therefore curtail executive aggrandizement. So I would like to end this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Magno. Let me turn to our third presenter, Dr. Sri Nuriyanti, Director of Regional Research and Innovation Policy at the National Research and Innovation Agency. So Sri will present on Indonesia.
Hello, good morning. Hang on. Today, I would like to talk about advancing democracy, a demand for institutionalized horizontal accountability in the case of Indonesia. And as I wrote in the paper, we have a constitution that applies since 1945. Therefore, we call it Constitution 1945. And then we have some dynamics towards 1971, in which it is really related to how we conceive the horizontal accountability. Because in 1971, we have political party fusion or merger that's create kind of coalition. And then in 2002, we have an amendment of the Indonesian Constitution. It will it was a 4 times amendment, and I would like to talk about nowadays horizontal accountability in Indonesia. For the amendment, the constitutional amendment, we have for the first amendment, it is about limiting the power of president. And then the second one on the role and positions of local government, role and functions of the MPs, and also on the second amendment, it talk about human rights. On the third amendment, it was discussing on how we could impeach the president if president violate the law. Also discussing on independent state auxiliary institution, and also this is an important thing because this is on how people could actually do the direct election for the president and vice president. On the fourth amendment, it talk about education and economic affairs, as well as the transition rule. So for the fourth amendment, actually for the first discussion, I think another amendment will be sufficient, but after I learn more and digging more on many resources, another amendment will be resulted at someone who run into running wagon. Therefore, many people in my country doesn't believe that if there will be another amendment for the constitution, because it will instead of putting it to correct direction, it will be deteriorating the situation. On the constitutional and legal checks and balances mechanism in Indonesia, we have supremacy of law. We also apply the equality before the law, and we also respect due process of law. We also have a regulation that limiting the power. And then we also have the regulation on the existence of the independent state auxiliary institution. So basically, from this point of view, as constitutional and legal basis for checks and balances mechanism, we have the regulation that in place. So we just need to revise on actually how we could have the better checks and balances mechanism, because everything is already written in our constitution. And checks and balances within MPs, actually in Indonesia, we have not only two rooms, two layer of people representative and people consultative assembly, but we also have regional representative, in which from each province we have to elect four representative that placing their seat in the people consultative assembly. And the regional representative from each province, they don't have enough authority. Therefore, checks and balances within MP is also becoming a challenge for our MP system. The scheme of accountability deficiency, actually, because there was, and it is ongoing process of political parties polarization, because political parties in my country actually multi-party political party. Therefore, some of the political parties has coalition, and some of them trying to be the opposition. However, the format of coalition, as already been I wrote in the draft paper, it is in the form of fat coalition. Therefore, it was imbalanced coalition, and therefore it also resulted at weak opposition. And after weak opposition and fat coalition, it is resulted at weak checks and balances, and no such impeachment will be enabled, because coalition will try to defend for the positions of the president. So the weak opposition will be very vulnerable to combat the fat coalition. This is why the accountability is in deficiency in our country. The current conditions of check and balances, we can say that democracy tends to be artificial, because it is everything is in place but less effective opposition. And as I said earlier, that we do not have really well functions of checks and balances against the president, because the fat coalition that I already mentioned earlier. And the existing opposition is not based on programs or different programs, or not based on conflict or differences in political ideologies. Therefore, it is indicating that no practice of checks and balances to balance the executive power of the president. President Jokowi also, in this case, brought in figure who used to be the leader of opposition, because in 2019, when we have the election, President Jokowi actually has the opposition of Prabowo Subianto and Sandiaga Uno. But this time, Prabowo Subianto is our defense minister, and also Sandiaga Uno is also one of our minister. Therefore, all opposition has been conquered, quote unquote, to be part of the government itself. The position in Indonesia can be said that in terms of durability, the Indonesian constitution actually remained in place for several decades and has provided a foundation for Indonesian democratic system. The important that constitution is in its ability to protect individual rights, provide checks and balances, though it is very least, and to facilitate the societal changes. In Indonesia, we still face challenges in terms of checks and balances due to factors such as political dynamics, corruption, and the weakness in some of the institutional mechanism. Though we face that significant progress for strengthening democratic institutions since the fall of Suharto in 1998, or the fall of Orde Baru or New Order. Up to nowadays, it has been ongoing debates and concern regarding the effectiveness of checks and balances. Therefore, I propose that there should be push-up mechanism and top-down reforms, in which it includes the more substantial matter to institutionalize horizontal accountability, not just to fulfill the formality. We also need to call for open and transparent mechanism. Therefore, we need kind of public disclosure, especially for political parties. We need public hearings more frequently and hosted and involving the various stakeholders in the society. And this time we have the omnibus law that it is reducing the complexity of law that contradict to each other. I think that's all that I would like to present for today. And I'm still working on the free democracy and also the constitutional.org that has been sent by Professor Jung Kim. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Sri. Then let's turn to our first presenter, Mina Sumari, senior researcher at the Saint Yamaral Foundation of Mongolia. So, Sri, can you just turn down your screen so Mina can speak?
Okay, thank you. I hope everything is working now. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, I will be presenting on horizontal accountability in Mongolia. So one of the main things to just know in general about Mongolian political system is that there are some elements of instability and stability that were often discussed. And here, the first slide, I'm presenting those major points. So the sources of instability since the 1992 constitution have always been about the dual executive. There was for a long time a debate, who is the head of the executive branch? Is it the president or is it the prime minister? Because constitutional setup was such that it was rather obscure and not directly stated. And another source of instability was the double Dale problem and politicization of civil service. So these are the problems that are often discussed as sources of a lot of conflict and tensions. And another one would be the weak rule of law, which actually affects a lot of the problems with the judiciary and oversight agencies. In the end, adding to the general debate of whether Mongolian system should shift to presidentialism or parliamentarism to solve all of it. And because of this, there were two significant constitutional amendments since 1992 that were actually shifting the system more towards parliamentarism. And what this did was actually increase the power of the legislative branch and decrease the powers of the executive and the judicial branches. So let me just give you a bit of a general trend in terms of horizontal accountability index and liberal democracy index. As you can see, of course, since 1989, there was a big improvement in 1992 because of the transition to democracy. But then over the past 3 decades, you can see first 3 decades were, well, rather more or less even, but then it was actually since 2019 that is a visible decline. And this is very important because the previous amendment was in 1999, 2000. And this was something that actually was the first time that the president's power was reduced. But in 2019, the president's power was reduced even further, and the legislative power was significantly strengthened. And that is why it is causing such an abrupt drop in both the horizontal accountability and actually the liberal democracy index also has started to fall. And you can see that this is the comparison from 1992 and 2022. What you can see is that, yeah, obviously Mongolia belongs to the cases where horizontal accountability has declined. And it actually is very similar to India and Philippines. And what is common about those 3 cases is actually a weak judicial power. And when the judicial power is rather compromised and definitely that doesn't work in terms of balancing the executive and the legislative the way it should be. And there are also issues of grand corruption. Well, so this is actually in response to the comments that we received to the first draft. Just to give an idea, and this is Professor Jung's graphs. Thank you for giving us attention to this. And yes, as you can see on the left, this is prior to 2019 amendments. The Constitution actually introduced balanced legislative and executive powers. But the judicial power was rather unbalanced in comparison to the other two. It was originally set up with less power over the other branches. Okay. So let me just say, so the 1992 Constitution introduced very clear separation of power in legislative and judicial power. But generally, it had a very complicated executive branch. That's why it created a lot of like tension and conflicts, and they were the source of why the government started shifting more power to legislative, because the opinion was that would be the better shift rather than the presidential system. And there are different opinions on that, but most conclude that the forces behind those supporting to shift to presidential power were actually behind more or less active presidents. Other forces were more in favor of parliamentarism, and they were the ones that actually, in the end, won the argument. But after 2019 shift to parliamentarism, I would say that the constitutional design became very unbalanced, and the past balance was broken, and it really concentrated the power in the parliament, which overall weakened checks and balances from other branches. And this legally, it wouldn't have been a very big problem, because there are other oversight agencies that exist, and they should have been able to produce some kind of a balance or oversight over the legislative branch. But the reality is, of course, corruption and the problems with an actual implementation of a lot of policies. So actually, a lot of the oversight agencies are not free from political interference, and that is why the mechanisms are not working as they should, which overall creates some major risks for Mongolian democracy. One thing to keep in note is that right now we have a dominance of one party. The opposition parties have pretty much not been able to really, how to say, form force in the last couple of elections. They didn't manage to really do well. So it kind of concentrated all the power in one ruling party, which is why in this whole context, this creates an even further concentration of power. And in the foreseeable future, like no opposition party can actually manage to overcome certain barriers. They're both financial and structural. So next year's elections will be actually very important, and we will see how this goes, because in overall, there's very low trust in political institutions from the population, and there's also very little trust in political parties. People in general do not believe that parties represent their opinion, which is why I think a lot of the voting will actually depend on personalities rather than political parties. And overall, the general conclusions from cross-country research is that if there's a decline in horizontal accountability, then the quality of democracy will also deteriorate. And since Mongolia also has the problem with like one dominant party, I mean, from findings of other cross-country research, you can also see that it's more vulnerable to mass protests, and also in the context that I described with low trust in institutions and low trust in political parties representing public opinion. That means that there are really threats in terms of instability from social unrest. And another factor of instability comes from, of course, general regional trends with Russia and China and Mongolian economy being heavily dependent on it, which is why I think the economy is currently in decline, and it's not possible to foresee how much longer things can stay the way they are, and probably will further deteriorate. And this actually increases stakes for a lot of politicians to introduce further reform, because further reform would mean like trying to strengthen the rule of law and introduce an independent judiciary. And at that sense, since problems of corruption, there will be issues for them losing political power. So yes, that would be the main thing. And I will try not to be too negative. There are some positive trends, and we have to wait and see because there are some more constitutional amendments coming up. And also, there's also increasing political education among the population. So people are definitely more aware of the problems in the electoral system and the political system. And also, we can also see in political polls that there's more support for professionals in government. And actually, corruption scandals, they're like a double-edged sword, but they they bring up people's awareness to like existing problems and create this demand for better politics. And I would say that even the ruling party also evolved itself because they are introducing new candidates and new faces into politics. And there are some new parties emerging, and they're quite active on social media and also with their influencers. And in a way, they're also a bit more representation of women in politics, still not very high if you consider globally, but it's good enough compared to the past. And also political protest, and also not always a bad thing if the people can get more involved. At least that kind of introduces another mechanism of accountability. And then as for solutions, currently there's actually not much incentive at the top to introduce further reform. So our major statement would be that the main thing to improve the current horizontal accountability has to be the demand from the bottom. So it would be mostly citizens' vigilance and citizen activism that can introduce the improvement. And yes, I would say that the general trends would be that in research, it's just stays the same with prescriptions from O'Donnell from 1998. How do you improve horizontal accountability? And actually really the opposition parties have to be given more support. And the oversight agencies, if it's possible, they should have more leeway in investigating corruption cases. And yes, it would be similar for judiciary. And I would say that the citizen activism shouldn't end with just protest, but also like more in support of other new faces in politics. And right now it is all coming from social media. So yeah, that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mina. Our last panelist presenter is Dr. Chinen Wu, who is Associate Research Fellow at Academia Sinica. So Chinen is going to talk about Taiwan case.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and good morning. And today I'm going to talk about parliamentary and judiciary check on the executive branch in Taiwan. In the last webinar, I talked about the semi-presidential system and the filibuster and also the gridlock in Taiwan's executive and the parliamentary system. And so today I will focus more on the role of judicial branch on checking the power of the executive branch and the policy impact of the gridlock due to the filibuster in the parliament. But first, I still briefly review the legislative review process in Taiwan. In recent years, Taiwan has a unified government. It means that the ruling party will control both the executive branch and the legislative branch. So theoretically, the president can get the bill he wants to pass in the parliament to get it passed. But in reality, the president cannot easily push through their policy agenda. That's due to two factors. The first one is the degree of party unity. There are some division within the party. But this factor has gradually declined in recent years because there's an increasing party unity in both the two major parties. Another issue is lawmaking rules in the parliament. Mainly the filibuster are allowed, and there's no clear rule to end it. So if the opposition party can exert a filibuster and block the bills that the president proposed. So during President Ma, this is a unified government. but he is unable to push through his own policy agenda, like pension reform, free trade agreement. And the filibuster exists in the parliament at various stages, and there is no clear rule to end the filibusters. And during President Chai, the DPP is more assertive than the KMT in exercising its majority rights. It can expedite the committee reviewing process. So the party cannot reach agreement in the party caucus negotiation. The bill will simply move to the plenary session, and the ruling party can get it passed with its majority seats. So the DPP also more forcefully block protesters' intrusion into the parliament building. So the opposition camp cannot block the bill they do not like. So that's the review of the basic structure of the parliament, and the executive and the legislative branch. And now we talk about the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court is responsible for reviewing lower level court decision. And the Constitution law, it consists of 15 grand justices and who serve 8-year terms and are appointed by the president. When there are vacancies in the Constitutional Court, the incumbent president get a chance to nominate candidate. The candidates are subject to parliament approval. The constitutional design of the 8-year terms and the change between president and to create staggered intervals where justice nominated by different presidents sit in the same court. And so under this institutional arrangement, the justice nominated by different presidents in the court are supposed to balance each other and providing different views. So, but this is the theoretical situation. The reality is not really the case. The story is that since the KMT control parliament, block some candidate nominated by President Chen Shui-bian in the early 2000, and the succeeding KMT president Ma Ying-jeou nominated 11 of all 15 justices in 2013. And as a result, and the retirement of some grand justice in 2023, all Supreme Court justices are nominated by the DPP president. So since grand justices who serve 8-year terms are appointed by the president and approved by the parliament, if there is a concurrent government, the president can easily pick the candidate that are ideologically in line with him. The ideological divide in Taiwan is mainly about national identity. So it's not sure what will happen when a newly elected president is ideologically not in line with the grand justice. Will the Constitutional Court declare a major law enacted by the incumbent government unconstitutional? Under this situation, it becomes a divided government between the executive and the judicial branches. So this situation will entail check and balance between different branches, especially when the ruling party control both the executive and the legislative branch. But the downside of this situation is that some main policy initiated by the ruling party may be struck down by the court, and weakening the governability of the ruling party, and exacerbating the political antagonism between different political camps. And the next issue I will talk is about the policy impact of political gridlock. So the policy effect of political gridlock depends on the existence of effective filibuster and the ideological orientation of the main party. In general, KMT is the center-right party and the DPP is a center-left party. And compared with the KMT, the DPP government is less enthusiastic about the proposing liberal economic reform. And when President Ma took office in 2008, he pushed through a series of liberal economic reform, and many of them are related across Taiwan Strait economic relations to bolster the staggered economy. But the filibuster in the parliament, because of that, he was not able to get them passed. And since took office in 2016, the Chinese government largely shied away from structural economic reform, despite having stronger control of the legislative process in the parliament, as I mentioned earlier. So since the KMT cannot get their main reform because of filibuster, and the Chinese government does not actively push through economic reform, both parties tend to rely on infrastructure investment to bolster economic and the quality of life. So this is I think another very happy result of the legislative and executive relationship. And so government of both parties continue to rely on big projects that include many big projects along with a few industrial promoting policy to bolster growth, especially in time of economic recession and to enhance popular support. But also there's a confounding factor that is that Taiwanese tend to accept the idea of using big government investment project to stimulate the economy and to boost the growth. So that's the confounding factor. But the relation between the executive and the legislative branch do contribute to the over reliance on the big construction project. And so the final thing is that because both parties heavily use the infrastructure project to promote growth, and it become a clientelist network. Taiwan government normally incorporate several big projects into a mega national development project. So in addition to this big project, the national project also include many small-scale infrastructure projects, such as community library that are spread across different prefectures. And the two types of project are included in one single project and was given an inspiring name. For example, the Forward-Looking Infrastructure Development Program initiated by the DPP government in 2017. So the infrastructure projects are distributed through a clientelist network that benefit the different layers of construction company, politicians, and the people. So they are used more often to respond to economic turmoil and stimulate the economic development. And but many of the projects are economically wasteful and environmentally harmful. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As always, I learned a lot, and we stimulated each other's presentation and discussions. I cannot, of course, cannot summarize what I have found. The more I hear, I think I feel like I have to study more because it's very country by country cases. The same institutions are working in a different way. So what I'd like to suggest is that you reflect the comments of your colleague and come up with the revised paper. So when we edit your paper into one volume next year, then it can be a very excellent book chapter. So with that comment, I'd like to thank you again for participating in this webinar. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon or good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.